Welcome back to Media 7. The Copyright Amendment New Technologies Bill was a philosophical battleground for several years before it passed into law late last year. But one element remained unresolved, Section 92A. The Communist Select Committee removed it after hearing arguments from the public, but it was unexpectedly put back in the bill's final stages with the backing of both major parties. So what exactly is the fuss all about? Here's the wording.
Internet service provider must have policy for terminating accounts of repeat infringers. An internet service provider must adopt and reasonably implement a policy that provides for termination in appropriate circumstances of the account with that internet service provider of a repeat infringer. Repeat infringer means a person who repeatedly infringes the copyright in a work by using one or more of the internet services of the internet service provider to do a restricted act without the consent of the copyright owner.
To 92A's opponents, it turns internet providers into policemen under orders to disconnect without the bother of proof. They say a whole household or business could be cut off on the strength of an allegation against one person. Alarmist nonsense, say its backers. The last IT Minister, David Cunliffe, kicked for touch by ordering a delay on 92A until the end of this month. This is what his successor, Stephen Joyce, told us this week.
We acknowledge that there are concerns around the implementation of this law. We will keep a close eye on how the new law works in practice, and will look at making changes if they prove necessary.
We have both camps in the House tonight, along with the commentator who's been making most of the running on this issue lately, Patrick Pilcher. Next to him, Bronwyn Holloway-Smith, the co-founder of the Creative Freedom Foundation, which has been marshalling artists against the measure, and Ant Healy, the New Zealand director of APRA, which collects performance rights fees on behalf of thousands of songwriters. Thank you all for joining us. Pat, I have here, hot off the press, this just in, the Telecommunications Carriers Forum Draft Code of Practice, which is the way that the big guys, Telecom, Vodafone, the big ISPs, are going to approach this law. What's gone into this? What's the background to it?
Well, I mean, essentially, the copyright laws in New Zealand have been, fairly slow to catch up with technology. And I mean, this is just a function of legislation. It's always going to be slow in technology. So, really, the ISPs have had to come up with something. And, of course, the TCF, being the body most ISPs are signed to, has drafted this code.
They've actually only done this after voicing fairly loud objections, haven't they?
Well, that's just it. I mean, they're sort of trapped in the middle with this, really. And they've really, I mean, there's an old saying, when it rains, lemons make lemonade. And this is really what they've had to do. I mean, they're making the best of a bad thing because they really are caught in the middle and they have to comply with Section 92 and draft these policies. So this is a draft, that document that's been released today. So it's still got to have submissions made. It's still got to be ironed out. There's kinks in it, and it's going to be an interesting couple of months, definitely.
Now, Bronwyn, what do you make of it? You've had a chance to have a look at it. Does it allay some of your fears? Is it good enough for you?
I've had a brief look over it, seeing that it's only been out for a few hours, but most of it seems fairly sensible from what I can tell, but there is one section 6, I think, that there is a proposed amendment to, which could see ISPs giving out private information of businesses to the accusers. So I think there's a period for feedback on this draft policy.
But in terms of your major objection, it does seem to have been assuaged somewhat. There's now this requirement for 3 undisputed infringement notices in 3 separate months. So if you object, I presume that doesn't apply. So this isn't going to happen overnight. It's not quite guilt without accusation, is it?
No, I think it does look like a good policy, but what we need to remember is that this law is still a guilt upon accusation law. If the TCF has
or is it just vague? Are you putting the worst possible construction on the law that's just vague?
No, I'd agree with Bronwyn. I mean, the burden of proof is squarely on the accused person who is deemed to be guilty unless they can prove otherwise. That's definitely, guilt, and it sort of flies in the face of all notions of democracy, really. And I think that's my biggest beef with the legislation as it stands.
Now, Ant Healy, you've been fairly vocal in supporting this law. One thing that interested me in this draft code of practice is a fairly clear statement from the carriers about social responsibility and not cutting off vulnerable users. I can see that Telecom looked at this and thought, Falili, Mulianga, we don't want to be there. It doesn't seem like it's a great look that this had to come from a big company like Telecom and not you as a supporter of the law.
You have to look at this law as part of a wider section of copyright law reform last year. Without question, it is focused on fixing some of the imbalances that seem to have appeared through the uptake of digital technology. And that is the mass reproduction and the mass copying, the file sharing of copyright works. Look, we've been part of the discussions that lead up to what is in front of you today as a draft code of practice, and we've raised many of the issues that we see as being dangerous.
When you say we, did you go back to your members? Because I know Bronwyn has had people sign up who are APRA members who are really unhappy about this.
Look, we don't pretend that we are. We're a big organisation. We're an organisation of 6,000 members. Of course, they will have divergent opinions. We're governed by a board of directors who are composers, and we have clear instruction about what positions to take. We must not stand idly by and watch really core important rights simply be ignored.
But you just had your best revenue year ever last year.
Well,
you don't seem to be suffering from this.
I'm not. Well, we are. If you look at the revenue streams that revolve around the revenue from CD sales, for instance, a small part of which goes to a composer, then of course we are. I could give you those figures, and the figures have been decimated. This month alone, the recording industry, we're not the recording industry, but the recording industry has suffered, massive drops in revenue.
What do you make of that, Bronwyn?
Well, I think there's no denying that copyright infringement takes place, and we're certainly not denying that or saying that there shouldn't be any copyright law. What we're concerned about, and what the artists we represent are concerned about, is that this law is presenting a law that will see people being labelled as guilty until proven innocent, and it's not something that artists want done in their name.
It simply won't happen. Having been part of the process...
Which is a nice thought, but I need you to justify that statement.
Well, I just don't believe that will be the case.
It's a bit easy to leave it up to ISPs or anyone but the courts to define, though, isn't it? It's nice to think that people will behave and not make false accusations or...
And that actually was one thing that came out of the Copyright Act at the same time as this came in, a penalty for making a false claim of copyright.
Look, within the code itself, there are structures in place, processes in place to ensure that the level of evidence that's required in making or providing a notice or making a claim, making an accusation, is such that simply we don't feel that, at least in our situation, that false accusations will be made.
But then again, this has come from the carriers. It's not in the law. It didn't come from you guys. It came from the telecommunications.
I think it's here for a second too. A vast majority of the downloads, illegal downloads, of course, are sourced from the US. Now, I wrote a piece for the Herald basically that showed how easily a US takedown notice could actually be spoofed. It's incredibly easy. These researchers at Washington University managed to get their printers, the network printers in the room, accused of copyright theft. So,
and that's something that they were actually incapable of doing.
Printers cannot steal files.
We've been looking a lot at what's been happening overseas as well, and kind of researching that and taking that as a guideline of what might happen in New Zealand. And we've seen things like the Church of Scientology issuing thousands of notices to YouTube overnight to take down videos on YouTube that criticised the church. And YouTube responded to those and took them down. Among those videos was footage of people protesting against the church, people having their say in front of their webcam, criticising the church. And so these laws have actually been used overseas as a form of censorship, and that's something that we really concerned about.
If you look closely at the code, there is a process in place to provide approved rights holders with certain processes. It's a relatively complex system, but one that we believe, and in fact all the ISPs believe. So you'll have to be an approved rights holder. You'll actually have to be someone rather than just anyone. No, there will be an opportunity for anyone to make a claim, but the standard of evidence that will be required will be extremely high. At least if not higher than what would be required by a civil or a criminal court. So, it's not going to be...
So why not go through the courts then, Anne?
Because, simply the government have put in place, they've seen a problem and they've seen a solution to the problem. They've left it up to the ISPs and to the rights holders to provide an answer, and that's what we're trying to do. Sure, along the way everyone's dreamt up extreme situations that might happen. I don't believe it's reality. I don't believe it's going to happen, and I don't believe that there will be,
Isn't that a bit naive, considering that it won't just be New Zealanders making these accusations? These accusations could come from overseas by organisations like the Church of Scientology, like the Recording Industry Association of America, who similarly have a reputation for making accusations whereby the evidence doesn't hold up to court scrutiny.
Look, if we're going to take this conversation down to the level of the Church of Scientology and let the Church of Scientology dictate to the processes that we want to put in place.
It does happen. I mean, there is that chilling effect in that you can make a copyright claim and you can get something removed in circumstances where you would not be able to go into defamation law. Pat, if we could move on to, you wrote about what the British government has decided to do. They were all fixing to do pretty much this, and suddenly they backed off, and now ISPs are going to be asked to write letters.
Correct, yes.
How does that work?
Basically, I think essentially the UK government just looked at this whole thing and thought, well, okay, and then they looked at it a bit closer and realised, well, look, there's some real issues here. I mean, just compliance headaches with this are a nightmare, and I mean, I feel sorry for smaller ISPs in New Zealand having to comply with this law, right? It's going to be a complete mess. There are so many hidden traps in this legislation as it stands, and bear in mind too that this is draft and there's going to be a lot of debate.
One thing I really wanted to get to was I think the irony of what's happened around this whole bill, not just Section 92A, is that it's had the two pillars of the last government's creative industry strategy at each other's throats. There's been no assumption of good faith by one side to the other. I wonder, is there any chance of resolving this? Because I've got feet in both camps, and boy, the geeks don't like the music companies at the moment, and the feeling seems to be mutual. Well, how can this be sorted out?
We aren't the recording industry. We're not just music companies. We're a whole bunch of individuals as well. I think there are solutions, and perhaps some good will come of the discussions that we've had sitting around table with representatives of all the ISPs. And they might be licensing solutions. The ISPs admit themselves that they hear from their subscribers, their customers, that they want solutions. They want the ability to do things legally. Section 92 is about education. It's not about turning people's internet connections off. It simply won't happen en masse like everyone has said it will be.
Right, last word to you, Bronwyn, on that topic. Can you resolve your differences?
Oh, I think absolutely we are looking to address this issue in a realistic way. This law falls well short of doing that. It needs to be repealed, looked at, and something needs to be put in its place, but not this law. We've got a forum on our website where a lot of people are talking about solutions, possible solutions that could come in place. One thing that's been mooted is the idea of a copyright court, which would operate similarly to the disputes tribunal, where these kinds of claims can be sorted out quickly and cheaply. So there are ideas out there of how we can resolve this, but this law is not the way to resolve the issues of copyright infringement.
It was nice to end on a positive suggestion there. No doubt the debate will continue, but we have time for one more thing. In his report this week, Simon Pound finds a man with a plan to become famous in not so much 15 minutes as for a commercial half hour.
Waitomo, famous for the glowworm caves, and also home to Woodland Park, where you'll find a man who is famous overseas, but little known inside New Zealand. Meet Barry Wood, aka Billy Black. He's dreamt up and made some of the world's most unusual motel units.
Well, this is the first, the train. So this is number 2, the aeroplane. And this is the third unit, the Hobbit. This is the latest, the Titanic.
Why? Well, as a small tourism operator, Barry decided he needed some hooks to get media coverage, to get famous, to get business.
It's just that point of difference. It just gives me that edge for marketing.
And look how it's worked out.
Radio, TV, books, magazines, 56 different inquiries last year. That's over one a week.
50-something approaches, and those media have come from all over.
Places like Germany, Switzerland, Hungary, New York, Russia, Spain, Santa Barbara, Sunday Star Times in London, Daily Telegraph, Geo Magazine, the Royal Dutch Airlines, and this is just not even touching the surface.
These reports send tourists his way, to the motels and also to the Kiwi culture show he puts on.
Timber!
The tourists love it. He can be a real wind-up artist.
A little bit more, you're nearly there. Keep going. Just a couple more.
No, Bull, you can see why. He's got the world's attention. But why isn't he world famous in New Zealand?
It's a love-hate relationship for me for New Zealand media. I get frustrated that I've moved this bloody great aeroplane here, but, you know, didn't really get a story out of it or move that ship. I mean, it's one of the big moves across New Zealand, but it's never been on TV, you know.
Yeah, you'd think someone would have noticed him moving those bloody great motels around. But these local media difficulties don't stop Bazza. In fact, he has a new media dream.
My dream is to actually get on the Letterman show.
The Letterman show? How's he going to get there? Meet Ali. What's with the pig? Well, there's a proud tradition of animal novelty acts on the Letterman show.
Our next participant tonight on Stupid Pet Tricks, Mr. Ed Nash.
With his worldwide reach and cultural sway, Letterman is the media stunt holy grail. So Barry is training Ali to sit, to score a try, to say goodbye,
Boy, good boy.
and to climb this ramp to one day be able to ride together on a Harley Davidson.
Hog on hog, come on. Up here, come on.
It's early days yet, but if anyone can pull this off, Barry can.
It's a big dream, but hey, anything's possible.
And we believe in him too. Media 7 is going to help. We'll post this story off to the Letterman show and keep you posted. In the meantime, we'd best leave Billy and Ali to practice. Say bye-bye, Ali. Bye-bye.
A man with a dream of a hog and a hog. And that's our show for this week. Thank you to our copyright panellists, Pat Pilcher, Bronwyn Holloway-Smith and Ant Healy, and our Fiji panellists, David Roby, Barbara Drever and Robert Kahn. And of course, thank you for watching. We'll be back at the Classic next week. Until then, goodbye.